Deep in the cold vacuum of space, the James Webb Space Telescope captured something that would change everything we thought we knew about our place in the universe. On a barren exoplanet millions of miles away, an enormous shadow began moving across the surface in patterns that defied explanation. Scientists dismissed it as a glitch until the movement repeated every 24 hours, perfectly matching Earth's rotation. More telescopes confirmed what seemed impossible. This wasn't natural. Something was deliberately trying to be seen. Then the shadow changed direction and started moving toward Earth. What could create a shadow visible from across the galaxy? And why would it be coming for us? Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Goddard Space Flight Center, casting long shadows across Dr. Elena Vasquez's desk. She sat in the quiet stillness of 5:47 a.m., her hands wrapped around a ceramic mug that had long since gone cold. The office smelled faintly of coffee and old paper, a comfort she had grown accustomed to over 3 decades of early mornings just like this one. At 58, Elena had earned every grey strand in her dark hair, every line around her eyes that deepened when she smiled. Her colleagues often said she had the kind of face that inspired confidence, the sort of calm presence that could steady a room full of panicking scientists when data didn't make sense. She wore simple clothes, practical and unadorned, a navy cardigan over a white blouse, reading glasses hanging from a silver chain around her neck. The photograph on her desk showed a younger version of herself, standing beside Thomas, her late husband, both of them grinning at the camera with the Atacama Desert stretched out behind them. He had been gone for 2 years now, taken by a heart attack that came without warning on an ordinary Tuesday morning. She still reached for him sometimes in the night, her hand finding only empty space and cool sheets. Elena turned her attention to the monitors before her. 3 large screens displaying streams of data from the James Webb Space Telescope. This was her ritual, her meditation. Every morning before the rest of the team arrived, she would sit in the silence and watch the universe reveal itself in numbers and images, in wavelengths of light that had traveled unimaginable distances to reach her eyes. The James Webb had been operational for years now, and the initial excitement had settled into something steadier, more sustainable. The groundbreaking discoveries still came, but they came with patience, with the kind of careful observation that defined Elena's entire career. She had been part of the original proposal team, had fought for funding through 3 different administrations, had waited through delays and setbacks that would have broken lesser souls. The door opened behind her, and she heard the familiar shuffle of Marcus Chen's footsteps. He was always the second to arrive, a 45-year-old data analyst with an uncanny ability to spot patterns in chaos. He wore his usual uniform of jeans and a button-down shirt, his black hair showing touches of silver at the temples. "You're going to wear out those monitors," Marcus said, setting down his backpack with a soft thump. His voice carried the gentle teasing of an old friend. "They can handle it," Elena replied without turning around. "Besides, someone needs to keep watch while the rest of the world sleeps." Marcus moved to his own workstation, 3 desks over in the open-plan office. The space was designed for collaboration, with low partitions that allowed easy conversation but provided just enough privacy for focused work. Whiteboards covered one wall, filled with equations and diagrams in various colors of marker. A small kitchenette occupied the corner, and the ever-present smell of brewing coffee began to fill the room as Marcus started a fresh pot. "Anything interesting overnight?" he asked, his fingers already dancing across his keyboard, pulling up the automated reports that had compiled while they slept. "The usual," Eleanor said. "Kepler 442b observation sequence completed. Initial data looks clean. I haven't done a deep dive yet. Kepler 442b was one of thousands of exoplanets they monitored on a rotating schedule. Located roughly 1,200 light-years away in the constellation Lyra, it was a rocky world orbiting a K-type star. The planet sat in what scientists called the habitable zone, that Goldilocks region where conditions might allow for liquid water. Early observations had shown nothing particularly remarkable. No atmosphere to speak of, no signs of water, no indication of anything beyond a barren rock tumbling through space. But they observed it anyway, because that was the work. That was what 3 decades had taught Elena. You looked at everything, you documented everything, because you never knew when the universe might surprise you. The office began to fill as morning crept toward 7 o'clock. Sarah Kim arrived next, a 34-year-old junior astronomer with sharp eyes and sharper instincts. She had joined the team 2 years ago, fresh from a postdoc at MIT, and had quickly proven herself indispensable. She moved through the space with an energy that Elena sometimes envied, though she would never admit it aloud. "Morning, Dr. Vasquez, Marcus," Sarah said, dropping her messenger bag beside her desk. She wore her dark hair in a practical ponytail, and her workspace was notably more organized than either Elena's or Marcus's. Every pen and notebook in its designated place. Dr. Raymond Foster, the department head, was the last to arrive. At 62, he was only 4 years from mandatory retirement, a fact he mentioned with increasing frequency and varying degrees of dread. He had been Elena's mentor when she first joined Goddard, had guided her through her early projects with patience and wisdom. Now their relationship had evolved into something more equal. 2 colleagues who had weathered decades of budget cuts, political interference, and the slow, grinding work of pushing human knowledge forward, one data point at a time. "Team," Raymond said, settling into his chair with a slight groan. His office occupied a glass-walled corner of the floor, giving him a view of both his team and the Maryland landscape beyond. What does the universe have for us today? This was their routine, their rhythm. Elena had always found comfort in routines, in the predictable patterns that structured her days. Wake at 5, office by 6. First review of overnight data. Team meeting at 7:30. Deep analysis until lunch. Afternoon for writing, for correspondence, for the administrative tasks that came with senior positions. Evening review. Home by 7 usually. Dinner alone, reading, sleep, repeat. Thomas used to tease her about it. "You're going to turn into a robot," he would say, pulling her away from her laptop for an impromptu dance in the kitchen or dragging her out to a movie she had no interest in seeing. He had been her chaos, her reminder that life existed beyond the orderly progression of data and discovery. She missed him most in moments like these, in the quiet morning hours when the work was just beginning and the day held infinite possibility. He would have loved the James Webb, would have stayed up all night, poring over images from the edge of the observable universe, would have filled their home with his enthusiastic explanations of what they were seeing. "Eleanor!" Marcus's voice pulled her back to the present. "You should look at this." She rolled her chair over to his workstation, and Sarah moved closer as well, the 3 of them clustering around Marcus's screens. Raymond stood and walked over, completing their small circle. "What am I looking at?" Elena asked, studying the images Marcus had pulled up. "Kepler 442b data from last night," Marcus said. "I was doing the standard quality check and something caught my eye." He pointed to a sequence of images, each one time-stamped. "See this dark area here? It's moving." Elena leaned closer, her trained eye scanning the images. The exoplanet appeared as a small disk, its surface mottled with varying shades of grey. And yes, there was a darker region, a shadow of some kind, and it did appear to be in different positions across the sequence of images. "Could be a processing error," Raymond said, his voice thoughtful rather than dismissive. "Or a shadow from the planetary terminator as it rotates." "That was my first thought too," Marcus replied. "But look at the timeline. These images span 8 hours. If it was just normal planetary rotation, we would see consistent movement. This is different. The shadow moves, then stops, then moves again. And the pattern doesn't match what we would expect from the planet's known rotation rate." Sarah pulled out her tablet and began running calculations, her fingers moving swiftly across the screen. The planet's rotation period is approximately 37 hours. If we're seeing the Terminator, the shadow line should move at a consistent rate. But this is jumping. Elena felt something tighten in her chest, a familiar sensation she had learned to recognize over the years. It was the feeling she got when the data stopped making sense, when the universe presented something that demanded attention. It was part excitement, part anxiety, and wholly addictive. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," she said, keeping her voice level. "Marcus, can you pull up the raw data files? I want to see the unprocessed images before we draw any conclusions." "Already on it," Marcus said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. The next hour passed in focused silence, broken only by the occasional observation or request for a different data set. Eleanor pulled up her own workstation, running independent analyses to verify what Marcus had found. Sarah contacted the operations team to confirm that the telescope had been functioning normally during the observation window. Raymond made coffee, a task he always took upon himself during moments of intense concentration, as if the ritual of grinding beans and measuring water helped him think. The raw data told the same story. Something dark, something large, was moving across the surface of Kepler 442b in a pattern that defied easy explanation. It was not consistent with known geological or atmospheric phenomena. It was not an artifact of the imaging process. It was real, or as real as anything could be, when observed from 1,200 light-years away. "We need more data," Elena said finally, looking up from her screens. "Raymond, can we request additional observation time?" Raymond nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "I can put in an urgent request, but you know how the schedule works. We might not get telescope time for weeks." "Then we use what we have," Elena said. "Let's build a comprehensive report. I want every possible natural explanation explored and documented. Sarah, work on atmospheric modeling, see if there's any way this could be weather-related, even though we've never detected an atmosphere. Marcus, dive deeper into the data. See if you can establish a precise pattern to the movement. I'll handle the write-up and start reaching out to colleagues at other institutions." "You think this is significant?" Sarah said. It was not quite a question. Elena considered her words carefully. "I think it's unusual, and unusual deserves our attention." She paused, then added, "But let's keep this internal for now. No sense starting rumors until we understand what we're dealing with." The team dispersed to their respective tasks, and Elena returned to her desk. She pulled up her observation log, the leather-bound journal that had accompanied her through her entire career. Thomas had given it to her on her first day at Goddard, a gift to commemorate the beginning of what he had called her grand adventure among the stars. The journal was filled with her neat handwriting, decades of notes and observations, sketches and calculations. She had documented every major discovery, every unexpected result, every moment when the universe had revealed something new. She turned to a fresh page and began to write, recording the date, the time, the initial observations. But as her pen moved across the paper, she found her mind wandering to the dreams she had been having recently. They had started about 3 months ago, subtle at first, easy to dismiss. In them, she stood in a vast, empty space, darkness pressing in from all sides. And in that darkness, patterns emerged, lines and shapes that moved with purpose, that seemed to be trying to tell her something. She had mentioned the dreams to no one, not even in the privacy of her journal. They felt too personal, too strange. Elena Vasquez did not believe in premonitions or cosmic messages. She believed in data, in observation, in the scientific method. Dreams were just the brain processing information, nothing more. But still, as she wrote about the shadow on Kepler 442b, she could not shake the feeling that she had seen this before, in those dark spaces between sleeping and waking. The pattern of movement, the deliberate way the shadow seemed to be tracing something across the planet's surface. She closed the journal and set it aside, turning her attention back to the screens before her. Outside, the sun had fully risen, and the Maryland landscape was bright with autumn color. The trees that lined the facility grounds were showing their reds and golds, a reminder that even in the midst of cosmic mysteries, life on Earth continued its familiar cycles. The phone on her desk rang, startling her from her thoughts. She picked it up to find Dr. Richard Chen from the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics on the line, an old colleague with whom she had collaborated on numerous projects over the years. "Elena," he said, his voice carrying an edge of excitement she rarely heard from the normally reserved physicist. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything critical, but I needed to reach out. We've been analyzing some data from Kepler 442b, and I think we might have something extraordinary." Elena felt her pulse quicken. "Richard, we're looking at the same planet right now. What have you found?" "A moving shadow," he said. "Large scale, inconsistent with known planetary features. We picked it up in our monitoring program about 6 hours ago. I wanted to reach out before we published anything, see if you had corroborating data from Webb." "We do," Elena confirmed, her mind already racing through the implications. "Richard, can you send me everything you have? And let's set up a video conference for this afternoon. I think we need to bring a larger team into this conversation." They spoke for a few more minutes, exchanging technical details and agreeing on next steps. When Elena hung up, she found Raymond standing in the doorway of his office, watching her with an expression she knew well. It was the look he got when the universe had just handed them something that would demand everything they had. "That was Harvard," she said. "They've seen it too." Raymond nodded slowly. "Then this is real." "Yes," Elena said. "This is real." The morning stretched into afternoon, and the small team at Goddard Space Flight Center found themselves at the center of something they did not yet understand. More calls came in as the day progressed. Other observatories, other research teams, all reporting the same phenomenon. The shadow on Kepler 442b was not an error, not a glitch, not a misinterpretation of data. It was something else entirely. Elena stood at the window as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Behind her, her team worked with quiet intensity, their voices low as they coordinated with colleagues around the world. The normal rhythm of the office had given way to something more urgent, more focused. She thought of Thomas, of how he would have loved this moment. Not the mystery itself, but the coming together of minds, the collaborative effort to understand something new. He had always said that the best parts of science were not the discoveries themselves, but the journey toward understanding, the conversations and debates and late-night sessions where ideas were forged and refined. "Elena," Marcus called out, "you need to see this. The latest data just came in." She turned from the window and walked back to the cluster of monitors where her team had gathered once more. On the screen, a new sequence of images showed the shadow continuing its movement across Kepler 442b. But there was something else now, something that made Elena's breath catch in her throat. The shadow was forming a pattern, not random movement, not the chaotic drift of atmospheric phenomena. It was tracing lines across the planet's surface, deliberate and precise. And as the team watched in growing disbelief, they realized what they were seeing. The shadow was drawing something, a message perhaps, or a map, something meant to be seen, meant to be understood. "My God," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. Raymond moved closer to the screen, his weathered face reflecting the blue glow of the monitors. "How is this possible?" Elena did not answer. She could not answer, because the question was bigger than how. The question was who or what and why. The question was everything they thought they knew about the universe and humanity's place within it. Outside, the sun continued its descent, and darkness began to creep across the Maryland landscape. But in the office at Goddard Space Flight Center, the lights burned bright, and a team of scientists stared at images from a planet 1,200 light-years away, where something impossible was happening, something that would change everything. The leather-bound observation log sat on Elena's desk, still open to the fresh page where she had written her initial notes. The ink had dried, the words fixed in place, a record of the moment when the universe had stopped making sense. Or perhaps, Elena thought, the moment when it had finally started to make a different kind of sense altogether. She picked up her pen and added one more line to the entry, her handwriting steady despite the tremor she felt in her hands. Day 1 of contact. The video conference began at 3 in the afternoon, connecting 15 different institutions across 4 continents. Elena sat at the head of the table in conference room B, a windowless space with walls lined in sound-dampening panels and a large monitor dominating one end. Raymond sat to her right, Marcus and Sarah to her left. On the screen, faces appeared in a grid, each one representing some of the finest minds in astronomy and astrophysics. Dr. Richard Chen spoke first, his image transmitted from Cambridge. "Thank you all for joining on such short notice. I think we can dispense with formalities. Everyone here has seen the data. The question before us is simple. What are we looking at?" Elena had prepared notes, but she found she did not need them. The words came easily, shaped by 30 years of practice in presenting complex information to diverse audiences. The shadow on Kepler 442b measures approximately 800 kilometers in diameter. It moves across the planet's surface in patterns that do not correspond to any known natural phenomenon. The movement is precise, repeating at regular intervals. And as of this morning's observations, it appears to be forming geometric shapes. A woman in the grid, Dr. Amara Okoye from the European Southern Observatory, leaned forward. "You're suggesting artificial origin. I'm suggesting we cannot rule it out," Elena replied carefully. "Every natural explanation we've explored fails to account for the observed behavior. No atmospheric phenomenon, no geological process, no orbital mechanics can explain what we're seeing." The conference room erupted in overlapping voices, each scientist eager to offer their perspective. Elena let them talk, understanding that this was necessary, that everyone needed to process what was being suggested. The idea of artificial activity on an exoplanet was not new in theory. SETI had been searching for signals for decades. But theory was one thing. Actual observation was something else entirely. Dr. James Patterson from Caltech raised his hand, a gesture that seemed absurdly formal given the circumstances, but which somehow helped restore order to the conversation. "Let's assume for a moment that this is artificial. What could create a shadow visible from 1,200 light-years away? We're talking about something enormous, something operating on a planetary scale. A mega-structure," suggested Dr. Yuki Tanaka from Tokyo, "similar to theoretical Dyson sphere concepts, but configured differently. Something designed to cast shadows, to create visible patterns. But why?" Sarah asked, speaking up for the first time. "If something wanted to communicate, there are far more efficient methods. Radio signals, laser pulses, even gravitational waves. Why cast shadows?" The question hung in the air, and Elena found herself thinking of her dreams again. The patterns in the darkness, the sense of something trying to be seen. She pushed the thoughts aside, forcing herself to focus on the present moment. "Maybe," Raymond said slowly, "because shadows are universal. Any species with eyes would understand shadows. They transcend language, transcend technology. A shadow is one of the most basic forms of visual communication." Dr. Chen nodded. "That's actually elegant. If you wanted to be seen by anyone, anywhere, shadows would be comprehensible across vast differences in biology and culture." Elena pulled up a new image on the main screen, one that Marcus had compiled an hour earlier. It showed the shadow's movement tracked over a 12-hour period, with lines connecting the various positions to show the pattern it had traced. "There's something else," she said. "The pattern repeats every 24 hours. Silence filled the conference room, both physical and virtual. Elena watched the faces on the screen, saw the moment of realization dawn on each one. "Earth's rotation," Amara said quietly. 24 hours. Not the planet's own rotation, which is 37 hours. It's matching our rotation. It knows we're watching," Marcus added. "It's timing the display for us." Dr. Patterson ran a hand through his gray hair, his expression troubled. "That suggests not just intelligence, but awareness of Earth specifically. Awareness of us. Which brings us to the more pressing question, Dr. Chen said. What do we do with this information? Do we go public? The debate that followed was heated and complex. Some argued for immediate disclosure, pointing out that the discovery was too significant to keep secret. Others advocated for caution, for taking time to understand what they were dealing with before inviting public panic or speculation. There were concerns about national security, about religious implications, about the social and psychological impact of confirming that humanity was not alone. Elena listened to all of it, weighing each argument with the careful consideration that had defined her career. Finally, when the conversation began to circle back on itself, she spoke. We have perhaps 24 hours before someone outside this community notices the anomaly. Amateur astronomers, automated detection systems, graduate students doing routine data analysis. This is too big to contain. The question is not whether we go public, but how we do it and what story we tell. What are you proposing? Amara asked. A coordinated announcement, Elena said. A joint statement from our institutions presenting the facts as we know them. No speculation about origin or purpose, just the observations. We frame it as an unexplained phenomenon requiring further study. Dr. Chen nodded. That gives us room to investigate without committing to any particular interpretation. And it lets us control the narrative, Raymond added. At least initially. The vote, when it came, was not unanimous, but it was decisive. They would prepare a statement for release within 24 hours. Elena volunteered to draft the initial version, a task that would consume most of her night. The conference ended with agreements to reconvene in 12 hours, to share any new observations, and to coordinate their response to what would inevitably be an overwhelming flood of media attention. When the screen went dark and the conference room emptied, Elena sat alone in the quiet. She felt the weight of what was coming, the way this moment would fracture into countless other moments, each one carrying them further from the familiar and deeper into the unknown. Her phone buzzed with a text from her daughter, Claire, who lived in Seattle with her husband and 2 children. Mom, are you okay? Haven't heard from you in a few days. Call me when you can. Elena stared at the message, thinking of how to respond. What could she say? That she was fine? That everything was normal, when in fact everything had changed? She typed a brief reply, promising to call soon, knowing that soon might mean something very different than it had just yesterday. The drive home took 40 minutes, and Elena spent them in silence, the radio off, her mind processing the day's events. She had always prided herself on her rationality, her ability to remain objective in the face of surprising data. But this was different. This felt different. It felt personal in a way she could not quite articulate. Her house was dark when she arrived, a 2-story colonial in a quiet neighborhood of similar homes. She had lived here for 25 years, had raised Claire here, had shared a life with Thomas within these walls. Now it was too big, too empty, a reminder of everything she had lost. She made dinner mechanically, a simple pasta dish that required no thought. She ate at the kitchen table, the same table where she and Thomas used to share their days, where Claire had done her homework, where family dinners had unfolded with all their noise and warmth. The silence was oppressive, and for the first time in months, Elena found herself wishing for noise, for distraction, for anything other than the thoughts circling in her head. After dinner, she opened her laptop and began drafting the statement. The words came slowly at first, each sentence requiring careful consideration. How did you tell the world that something impossible was happening? How did you maintain scientific credibility while acknowledging that every rule seemed to be changing? She worked late into the night, revising and refining, sending drafts to Raymond and Dr. Chen for feedback. By 2 in the morning, they had something presentable, a careful balance of information and restraint. It said what needed to be said without saying too much. Elena sent the final version to the full group and closed her laptop. She was exhausted, but she knew sleep would not come easily. She walked upstairs to her bedroom, changed into pajamas, and lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling. The dreams came as soon as she closed her eyes. But this time, they were different, more vivid, more insistent. She stood in that vast, dark space, but now the patterns were clearer. Lines of shadow moving with purpose, forming shapes that almost made sense, but remained just beyond understanding. And in the distance, something vast and incomprehensible, something that saw her seeing it. The announcement went live at 9 the next morning, simultaneously posted on the websites of 15 major astronomical institutions and accompanied by a carefully orchestrated press conference. Elena watched from her office as Dr. Chen, chosen as the spokesperson due to his experience with media relations, read their statement to a room full of journalists. "We have observed an unusual phenomenon on the exoplanet Kepler 442b, he said, his voice steady and professional. A large-scale shadow has been detected moving across the planet's surface in patterns that do not correspond to any currently understood natural processes. We are conducting extensive analysis and collaborating with research teams around the world to determine the nature and origin of this phenomenon." The questions came immediately. A barrage of voices competing for attention. Is it aliens? Could this be evidence of extraterrestrial technology? What does this mean for humanity? Dr. Chen deflected each one with practiced skill, emphasizing the need for continued observation and analysis, refusing to speculate beyond what the data clearly showed. Elena's phone began ringing before the press conference even ended. News organizations, documentary producers, government officials, colleagues from institutions not involved in the initial discovery. She let most calls go to voicemail, knowing that she needed to focus on the work rather than managing the chaos that would inevitably follow. Sarah appeared in her doorway, her normally composed expression showing signs of strain. "The server is getting hammered. Every amateur astronomer in the world is trying to access our data archives. Work with IT to increase capacity," Elena said. "And prepare a public data set. Something that gives people enough information to satisfy their curiosity without overwhelming them with raw numbers." "Already on it," Sarah replied. "But Elena, there's something else. Marcus found another pattern in the shadow movement. You should see this." Elena followed Sarah to Marcus's workstation, where he had 3 monitors displaying different views of the Kepler 442b data. His eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep, and an empty coffee cup sat beside his keyboard. "I've been tracking the shadow over the past 48 hours, he said, not bothering with preamble. "The pattern it's creating is not random. Look at this." He pulled up an overlay that combined all the shadow positions into a single image. What emerged was unmistakable, a series of concentric circles with radiating lines, like a simplified representation of a solar system. And at the center of those circles, a single point that seemed to pulse in the animation Marcus had created. "It's a map," Elena said softly. "Not just any map," Marcus replied. "Look at the number of radiating lines, 8, and the third circle from the center, see how it's emphasized. Darker, more defined." Sarah leaned closer to the screen. 8 planets. "The third one from the center is emphasized. That's us. That's Earth. It's showing us our own solar system," Marcus said. "And it's marking our position." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. "It's not just trying to be seen. It's trying to tell us it knows where we are." The implications settled over them like a weight. This was no longer just about contact or communication. This was about recognition, about being seen and identified by something vast and incomprehensible, operating 1,200 light-years away. Raymond joined them, having left his office for the first time that morning. His face was pale, and he moved with a weariness that seemed to go beyond simple physical exhaustion. "I've been on the phone with NASA leadership," he said. "They want a full briefing this afternoon, and the National Security Council is requesting that we share all our data." "That's premature," Elena said. "We're still in the early stages of analysis." "They don't care," Raymond replied. "As of 2 hours ago, this became a matter of national security. We're no longer operating purely as a scientific mission. Elena wanted to argue, wanted to push back against the intrusion of politics and security concerns into what should be a purely scientific endeavor. But she had been in this field long enough to know how these things worked. The moment something became significant, it became contested. Different agencies, different interests, all wanting their piece of control. "We share everything we have," she said finally. "Full transparency. But we make it clear that we need to maintain operational control of the research. The moment this becomes classified, we lose the ability to collaborate internationally, and that collaboration is essential." Raymond nodded. "I'll do what I can. But Elena, you should prepare yourself. This is going to get complicated in ways we can't anticipate." The briefing that afternoon took place in a secure facility in Washington, a nondescript building that housed various intelligence and defense operations. Elena rode down with Raymond, neither of them speaking much during the hour-long drive. She had changed into more formal attire, a dark suit that felt constraining after the comfortable clothes she typically wore in the office. The briefing room was smaller than she expected, with a conference table that seated 12 and walls that were almost certainly equipped with surveillance equipment. She recognized some faces from news coverage. Others she had met at various scientific conferences and government functions. There were military officers, intelligence analysts, a representative from the State Department, and several people whose roles were never clarified. Elena presented the findings with the same clarity she had used in countless academic presentations, but she could feel the difference in the room. These people were not interested in the scientific method or the beauty of discovery. They were interested in threat assessment, in strategic implications, in what this meant for national security and global power dynamics. "Can it see us?" asked an Air Force general whose name tag read Morrison. "I mean, can whatever is creating this shadow actually observe Earth?" "We don't know," Elena replied. "The light we're seeing from Kepler 442b left that planet 1,200 years ago. Anything observing us from there would be seeing Earth as it was in the 8th century. But if they have the technology to create shadows visible across interstellar distances, they likely have other capabilities we can't imagine." "Could this be a threat?" asked a woman from the CIA. Elena chose her words carefully. "Anything operating on this scale represents potential threat simply by virtue of its capabilities. But we have no evidence of hostile intent. The shadow appears to be communicative, not aggressive." "Yet," Morrison said. "It's not aggressive yet." The questions continued for 2 hours, each one revealing the enormous gap between scientific curiosity and security concerns. Elena did her best to bridge that gap, to help these people understand what they were dealing with, but she felt the frustration building with each exchange. When the briefing finally ended, Raymond pulled her aside in the hallway outside the conference room. "That went as well as could be expected. They want to weaponize this," Elena said, her voice low. "They're already thinking about how to use it, how to control it. Can you blame them? This is potentially the most significant event in human history. Of course they're going to approach it from a security perspective." Elena wanted to argue, but she was too tired. She had slept perhaps 3 hours in the last 48, and the weight of what was happening pressed down on her shoulders like a physical force. They drove back to Goddard in silence, arriving just as the sun was setting. The parking lot was still full, every light in the building blazing. The team had been working around the clock, and Elena felt a surge of pride mixed with concern for their well-being. Sarah met her at the entrance, her expression urgent. "We have new data." "The shadow changed." "Changed how?" Elena asked, following Sarah through the corridors to their office. "It's moving faster now." "Much faster." "And the pattern is different." Marcus had the new images up when they arrived. Elena studied them, her trained eye immediately catching the changes. The shadow was no longer tracing the solar system map. Instead, it was moving in a spiral pattern, starting at one edge of the planet and working its way inward toward a central point. "How long until it reaches the center?" Elena asked. "At current rate of movement, approximately 18 hours, Marcus replied. And then what? No idea. But Elena, there's more. Look at the rate of movement. It's accelerating. The shadow is moving faster with each rotation. Elena pulled up a chair and sat down, her eyes fixed on the screens. The spiral was hypnotic, drawing the eye inward, creating a sense of inexorable progression toward something. But what? Her phone buzzed with a text from Claire. "Mom, just saw the news. Are you okay? Everyone's talking about aliens. Please call me." Elena stepped away from the monitors and called her daughter. Claire answered on the first ring, her voice tight with worry. "Mom, what's happening?" "The news is saying you discovered something on another planet." "I'm fine, sweetheart," Elena said, trying to keep her voice calm and reassuring. "Yes, we've observed something unusual, but I'm okay. The team is okay. We're just working very long hours right now." "Is it really aliens?" Claire asked, and Elena could hear the fear beneath the curiosity. "We don't know what it is yet," Elena replied honestly. "But whatever it is, we're taking every precaution. I promise you, I'm safe." They talked for a few more minutes, Elena deflecting the more pointed questions while trying to provide enough information to ease Claire's concerns. When she hung up, she found Raymond waiting nearby, his expression sympathetic. "Go home, Elena," he said gently. "Get some sleep. The shadow will still be there in the morning." "I can't," Elena replied. "Not yet. Not while it's still changing. You're not going to help anyone if you collapse from exhaustion. Your team needs you alert and focused, not running on caffeine and adrenaline." Elena wanted to argue, but she recognized the truth in his words. She was operating on the edge of her capacity, and that served no one. "2 more hours," she compromised. "Let me set up the monitoring protocols for overnight. Make sure we have alerts configured for any significant changes. Then I'll go home." Raymond nodded. 2 hours. I'm holding you to that. The work helped center her, gave her something concrete to focus on, beyond the swirl of implications and possibilities. She worked with Marcus to establish thresholds for automated alerts, set up redundant observation schedules with partner institutions, and prepared briefing documents for the morning team meeting. At 10 o'clock, she finally forced herself to leave, driving home through streets that seemed both familiar and foreign. The world looked the same as it had 3 days ago, but everything had changed. People walked their dogs, teenagers congregated at a corner store, traffic lights cycled through their patterns. Life continued its normal rhythms, oblivious to the fact that something 1,200 light-years away was drawing spirals on a distant planet. Her house was dark again, and Elena moved through it mechanically, going through the motions of her nighttime routine. Shower, pajamas, a cursory attempt at eating something that sat untouched on her nightstand. She climbed into bed and closed her eyes, expecting the dreams to come. But this time, sleep was elusive. Every time she drifted toward unconsciousness, her mind jerked her awake with new questions, new concerns, new possibilities. What was at the center of the spiral? What happened when the shadow reached its destination? And the question that scared her most, what if this was not just observation but preparation? She thought of Thomas, wished desperately that he was beside her. He would know what to say, would find some way to make this feel less overwhelming. He had always been her anchor, the one who could pull her back from the edge of obsession that came with major discoveries. "I miss you," she whispered into the darkness. "I wish you were here to see this. You would have loved it." Eventually, exhaustion won out over anxiety, and Elena fell into a fitful sleep. The dreams were vivid and strange, filled with shadows and spirals, with vast presences moving in darkness. She saw patterns that hurt to look at, geometries that defied understanding, and at the center of it all, something waiting. She woke to her phone ringing at 3 in the morning, Marcus's name on the screen. Her heart immediately began racing as she answered. "It reached the center," Marcus said without preamble. "Elena, you need to get back here. Right now." She was dressed and in her car within 5 minutes, driving through empty streets with a sick feeling in her stomach. The drive to Goddard had never felt longer. Every red light an eternity, every empty stretch of highway a test of her patience. The facility was blazing with light when she arrived. and she could see people moving through the windows of her floor. She took the stairs rather than wait for the elevator, her heart pounding as she pushed through the door to their office. The entire team was there, along with several people she did not recognize. Everyone was gathered around the main display screen, staring at an image that made Elena's breath catch in her throat. The shadow had reached the center of the spiral, and there it had stopped. But it was not just sitting there. It was pulsing, expanding and contracting in a rhythm that seemed almost alive. And with each pulse, something was happening to the planet itself. The image on the screen showed Kepler 442b in unprecedented detail, the result of emergency observation time that had been granted by 3 different space telescopes. The shadow at the planet's center was no longer just a dark spot. It was a vortex, a swirling darkness that seemed to pull light into itself. "What are we looking at?" Elena asked, moving closer to the display. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, who had flown in from Tokyo just hours after the announcement, turned to face her. "We're not entirely sure. The shadow appears to be affecting the planet's electromagnetic signature. We're detecting energy readings that don't make sense, wavelengths that shouldn't exist. Could it be a wormhole?" someone suggested. "Some kind of portal?" "That's speculation," Elena said firmly, though she could not deny that her own mind had gone to similar places. "Let's focus on what we can measure and observe. Yuki, what exactly are these energy readings showing?" Yuki pulled up a graph on one of the secondary monitors. "Look at this spectrum. These peaks here and here, they're in ranges that violate our understanding of physics. Either our instruments are failing in very specific ways, or something on that planet is generating energy that shouldn't be possible." Marcus had been quiet since Elena arrived. His attention focused on running calculations on his workstation. Now he looked up, his expression troubled. "I've been analyzing the timing of the pulses. They're not random. They're counting down." "Counting down to what?" Raymond asked. "I don't know. But each pulse is slightly shorter than the last. If the pattern continues, the countdown reaches 0 in approximately 72 hours. The room fell silent as everyone processed this information. 72 hours until something happened. But what? And more importantly, how could something happening 1,200 light-years away affect Earth in real time? Elena's phone buzzed with an incoming call from General Morrison. She stepped away from the group to answer it, moving to the relative privacy of her office. "Dr. Vasquez," Morrison said without preamble, "we need to know if this represents an imminent threat to Earth." "General, I can't answer that," Elena replied. "We're seeing something unprecedented. The physics doesn't make sense. The timeline doesn't make sense. Anything I told you right now would be pure speculation. Then speculate. That's what we pay scientists for." Elena took a breath, forcing herself to remain professional. If something 1,200 light-years away is somehow operating on a countdown that we can observe in real time, then it's utilizing technology or physics we don't understand. That could mean faster-than-light communication, or it could mean we're misinterpreting the data. Either way, the capabilities implied are beyond anything in our current theoretical framework. In plain English, Dr. Vasquez, in plain English, if this is real, if it's what it appears to be, then yes, it could represent a threat. But it could also represent an opportunity, or it could be something we can't even categorize with our current understanding. Morrison was silent for a moment. "I'm authorizing additional resources. Whatever you need, you get it. But I want updates every 6 hours. And if that countdown reaches 12 hours, we're implementing emergency protocols." "What kind of protocols?" Elena asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "The kind that protect this country and its citizens. Just keep us informed, Doctor." The call ended, and Elena sat in her office chair, staring at the ceiling. 72 hours. 3 days until something happened, or until the countdown meant nothing at all. She thought about evacuation plans, about what emergency protocols might actually accomplish against something that could manipulate energy across interstellar distances. Sarah appeared in her doorway. "Elena, we have someone here who wants to speak with you." Dr. Michael Foster from the CT Institute. Elena had heard of Foster, a physicist who had spent his career searching for signs of extraterrestrial intelligence. She had never worked with him directly, but she knew his reputation as both brilliant and controversial. He was younger than she expected, perhaps in his early 40s, with dark hair showing traces of grey and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He extended his hand as she approached. "Dr. Vasquez, thank you for seeing me. I know you're busy, Dr. Foster. What can I do for you?" "I think the question is what I can do for you," he replied. "I've been analyzing the shadow patterns, and I believe I know what it's trying to communicate." Eleanor studied him carefully, her skepticism tempered by desperate hope. "I'm listening." Foster pulled out a tablet and began showing her a series of images and diagrams. "The spiral pattern isn't just decorative. It's a mathematical sequence, specifically a modified Fibonacci spiral. But there's more. Look at how the shadow pulses at the center. The rhythm follows a prime number sequence. Prime numbers are often suggested as a universal language," Marcus said, having joined them. "Any mathematical civilization would recognize them." "Exactly," Foster replied. "And when you combine the Fibonacci spiral with the prime number sequence, you get coordinates. Spatial coordinates." "Coordinates to what?" Elena asked. "That's what I've been trying to determine. But here's what concerns me. When I plot these coordinates using our current position in the galaxy as a reference point, they don't point to Kepler 442b. They point somewhere else entirely." He pulled up a star map on his tablet, showing a section of the galaxy that Eleanor recognized as being roughly in the direction of the galactic core. A red marker indicated the coordinates derived from the shadow pattern. "That's about 4,000 light-years from Earth," Sarah observed. "Twice the distance to Kepler 442b. "Yes," Foster confirmed. "Which raises an interesting question. If the shadow is originating from Kepler 442b, but pointing to a location 4,000 light-years away, what are we really looking at?" Raymond had been listening from his office doorway. Now he stepped forward, his expression grave. "You're suggesting that Kepler 442b might be a relay station? That whatever is creating the shadow is actually somewhere else?" "Or," Elena said slowly, working through the implications, "that what we're seeing on Kepler 442b is being projected from that other location." "A kind of interstellar beacon or message board," Foster nodded. "That's my hypothesis. And if that's true, then the countdown isn't measuring time until something happens at Kepler 442b. It's measuring time until something happens at those coordinates. Or worse, here." The team spent the next several hours analyzing Foster's findings, running independent verifications, and debating the implications. The more Elena looked at the data, the more convinced she became that Foster was onto something. The mathematics was elegant, too precise to be coincidental, but it raised more questions than it answered. If something 4,000 light-years away was projecting shadows onto Kepler 442b as a way to communicate with Earth, it implied capabilities that seemed impossible. It suggested not just advanced technology, but a fundamental understanding of physics that humanity had not yet achieved. As dawn broke over Maryland, Elena stood at the window of her office, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of pink and orange. Behind her, her team continued their work, voices low as they coordinated with colleagues around the world. The night had been long, but they were no closer to understanding what the countdown meant or what would happen when it reached zero. Her phone rang again. It was Claire, calling from Seattle, where it was still the middle of the night. "Mom, I can't sleep," Claire said, her voice small in a way that made Elena's heart ache. "The news is saying that something bad might happen. They're talking about evacuations and emergency procedures. I'm scared." Elena closed her eyes, wishing she could reach through the phone and hold her daughter like she had when Claire was small and frightened by thunderstorms. "I know, sweetheart. I'm scared too, but I need you to trust me. We're doing everything we can to understand what's happening, but you don't know, do you? You don't actually know if we're in danger." "No," Eleanor admitted, because lying would help no one. We don't know. But we're learning. Every hour we understand a little bit more. And there are very smart people working on this, not just here, but all over the world. What if it's too late? What if by the time we understand, it's already happened? Elena had no answer for that. It was the same question that had been circling in her own mind, the same fear that woke her in the night. Then we face it together, she said finally. All of us. But I haven't given up hope, and I need you not to either. They talked for a while longer, Eleanor doing her best to provide comfort and reassurance, even as her own certainty crumbled. When she hung up, she found Raymond standing nearby, 2 cups of fresh coffee in his hands. He offered her one, and she accepted it gratefully. How are you holding up? He asked. I'm not sure, Elena replied honestly. Raymond, what if we're wrong about everything? What if this isn't communication but something else entirely? What if we've been interpreting threat where there's none, or missing a threat because we're too focused on the idea of contact? Those are questions that would paralyze us if we let them, Raymond said gently. We can only work with what we know, what we can observe and measure. Second-guessing every interpretation will just slow us down. But what if we need to slow down? What if rushing toward answers is exactly the wrong approach? Raymond sipped his coffee, considering his response. Do you remember what you told me when you first joined this project? You said that the universe doesn't care about our timelines or our comfort. It presents us with what it presents us with, and our job is to observe and understand, not to control or dictate. I was younger then, Eleanor said, more certain about everything. You were younger, but you were also right. This situation is unprecedented, but our approach doesn't change. Observe, measure, analyze, understand. We do the work, and we trust that the work will lead us somewhere useful. Elena nodded, drawing strength from his steadiness. Raymond had been her mentor for so long that sometimes she forgot he was also her friend, someone who understood her not just as a scientist, but as a person. The morning briefing at 8 o'clock brought together the core team, plus several new faces, experts in various fields who had been brought in to help analyze the phenomenon. Dr. Foster presented his findings about the coordinates, and the debate that followed was intense and wide-ranging. We need to point more telescopes at those coordinates, argued Dr. Tanaka. If there's something there, we need to see it. Agreed, Elena said. But we also can't lose focus on Kepler 442b. Whatever is happening there is still our primary source of data. What about trying to communicate back? Suggested a young physicist named Dr. Ahmed Hassan. If this is an attempt at contact, shouldn't we respond? With what? Marcus asked. How do you respond to a shadow? We don't have the capability to project anything across interstellar distances. Radio signals, Hassan replied, directed toward both Kepler 442b and the coordinate location. Even if it takes 1,200 years for a signal to reach them, it shows intent to communicate. Eleanor considered this. It's worth discussing, but we need to be careful. Any response represents humanity, not just this team or this country. That's a decision that needs broader input. We may not have time for broader input, Foster said. 60 hours remaining on the countdown. If we're going to respond, it needs to be soon. The meeting continued for another 2 hours, covering technical details, strategic considerations, and contingency plans. By the time it ended, Elena felt drained in a way that went beyond simple exhaustion. Every decision seemed to carry impossible weight, every choice potentially affecting the future of humanity. She returned to her office to find a message from General Morrison requesting another briefing. She called him back, steeling herself for the conversation. Dr. Vasquez, Morrison said when he answered, I've been authorized to share some information with you. Information that may change your understanding of this situation. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. What information? 3 months ago, we detected unusual gravitational anomalies at multiple points around the solar system. We've been monitoring them, trying to determine their origin and nature. As of this morning, those anomalies have begun moving. They're converging on Earth. Elena sat down heavily in her chair. Why am I only hearing about this now? Because it was classified, and because until this morning we had no reason to connect the anomalies to the Kepler 442b phenomenon. But the timing is too precise to be coincidental. Whatever is creating that shadow, it's also responsible for the gravitational anomalies. How long until they reach Earth? Elena asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Approximately 60 hours. The same as your countdown. Eleanor closed her eyes, her mind racing through the implications. The shadow on Kepler 442b was not just a message or a beacon. It was a warning, or perhaps an announcement. Something was coming, something that could manipulate gravity across planetary distances, something that operated on a scale that made human technology look like stone tools. I need to inform my team, she said. You have clearance to brief your immediate group, Morrison replied. But this information does not leave that circle. We're already dealing with widespread panic. If people knew that something was actively approaching Earth, the situation would deteriorate rapidly. People have a right to know, Elena protested. People have a right to be protected. Right now, the best way to protect them is to maintain order while we figure out what we're dealing with. You do your job, Dr. Vasquez, and let us do ours. Elena gathered her core team in the conference room, making sure the door was closed and the sound dampening activated. She looked at their faces, these people she had worked with for years, and felt the weight of what she was about to share. What I'm about to tell you is classified, she began, but you need to know, because it changes everything we've been assuming about this situation. She explained what Morrison had told her about the gravitational anomalies, watching as comprehension and fear spread across their faces. Marcus was the first to speak. They've known for 3 months, and they said nothing. They didn't see a connection until now, Elena replied, though she shared his anger. The anomalies were being monitored, but they were treated as a separate phenomenon. This means the shadow isn't just communication, Sarah said slowly. It's a countdown to arrival. Something is using Kepler 442b as a way to announce its approach. Dr. Foster, who had been included in the briefing, pulled up calculations on his tablet. If the gravitational anomalies are converging on Earth from multiple points, it suggests a coordinated approach. Multiple objects or entities working in concert. Or a single entity capable of projecting itself across multiple locations simultaneously, Yuki suggested. We keep thinking in terms of ships or physical objects, but what if this is something else? What if we're dealing with a phenomenon that exists across multiple points in space at once? Raymond stood and walked to the whiteboard, picking up a marker. Let's work through this systematically. What do we actually know? Not speculation, but confirmed observation. He began writing, his neat handwriting filling the board. 1. Shadow on Kepler 442b, moving in deliberate patterns. 2. Patterns encode mathematical sequences and coordinates. 3. Countdown currently at 58 hours. 4. Gravitational anomalies approaching Earth. Arrival coincides with countdown 5. Energy readings from Kepler 442b violate known physics. Now, Raymond said, turning to face the group, what does this tell us about intent? Is this hostile, neutral, or potentially beneficial? We can't know intent, Elena said, but we can assess capability and probability. Whatever is approaching has technology far beyond ours. The question is whether it's coming to communicate, to observe, or to do something else entirely. Marcus had been quiet, his attention focused on his laptop. Now he looked up, his expression troubled. I've been analyzing the gravitational data that Morrison's team shared. The anomalies aren't just approaching Earth. They're forming a pattern around the planet. Specifically, they're positioning themselves at the vertices of an icosahedron, a 20-sided polyhedron, Sarah said. That's a very specific geometric arrangement. Yes, Marcus replied. And it's a pattern that appears in nature at the molecular level, in viral structures and certain crystal formations. It's one of the most efficient ways to enclose a sphere. The implications hung in the air, unspoken but understood by everyone in the room. 20 gravitational anomalies positioning themselves in a pattern designed to enclose Earth. It could be a research configuration, a way to study the planet from multiple angles. Or it could be something else, something that none of them wanted to articulate. Elena's phone rang. It was Claire again, but this time Elena sent it to voicemail. She would call her daughter back, would find a way to explain what was happening. But right now, she needed to focus on understanding the situation before trying to communicate it to anyone else. "We need to consider the possibility of evacuation," Dr. Foster said. "If these anomalies represent a threat, we should be preparing population centers for potential emergency measures." "Evacuate to where?" Raymond asked. "If something is surrounding the entire planet, there's nowhere to go. And even if there was, we couldn't move 7 billion people in 60 hours. Then we need to consider defensive measures," Foster pressed. "We have nuclear weapons, directed energy weapons, electromagnetic pulse technology. If this is an attack, we should be prepared to defend ourselves. With what success?" Elena asked sharply. "Against something that can manipulate gravity and project shadows across 1,200 light years. You're talking about using firecrackers against a hurricane. So we just wait?" Foster's voice rose with frustration. "We just sit here and let whatever this is happen to us?" "We gather information," Elena replied firmly. "We observe, we analyze, and we try to understand. That's what we can do, and that's what we will do." The room fell silent, tension crackling in the air. Elena understood Foster's frustration, shared it even. But panic and hasty action would help no one. They needed to think, to use their training and experience to approach this methodically. The countdown reached 24 hours, and the debate in the Pentagon had reached an impasse. No consensus could be reached on how to select who would be offered the transformation, and time was running out. Elena stepped away from the conference table, needing air, needing space to think. She found herself in a small office that had been set aside for the team's use, staring out a window at the Washington skyline. The city was darker than usual, power still fluctuating from the electromagnetic interference, but life continued. She could see cars moving on distant streets, lights in windows where people gathered, the small, defiant acts of normalcy in the face of cosmic uncertainty. Marcus found her there. "Elena, we need you back in the conference room. They're voting on whether to accept the invitation at all. What would refusing look like?" she asked, not turning from the window. "We don't know. Maybe nothing happens. Maybe the network withdraws and leaves us alone. Or maybe refusing is interpreted as hostility and things get much worse." Elena turned to face him. "Marcus, what would you do? If the choice was yours alone, would you accept the invitation?" He was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "I think I would. Not because I'm unhappy with being human, but because I'm curious. I want to know what comes next. I want to understand what this consciousness is, what it means to exist across space and time. But that's just me. I can't say what's right for humanity as a whole." "None of us can," Elena replied. "That's what makes this impossible. We're being asked to make a choice that will ripple through all of human history, and we have less than a day to make it." They returned to the conference room to find that the vote had been taken in their absence. By a narrow margin, the assembled representatives had decided to accept the invitation. Now came the even more difficult task of determining who would be offered the transformation. Dr. Foster proposed a framework based on diversity of perspective and skill. "We need scientists, yes, but also artists, philosophers, representatives from different cultures and backgrounds. The goal should be to create a group that reflects the full spectrum of human experience. And who decides what that spectrum looks like?" Challenged one of the UN representatives. "Every criterion we propose will exclude someone, will privilege some perspectives over others." Elena listened to the debate, feeling increasingly detached from the proceedings. Something about the entire discussion felt wrong, felt like they were missing something fundamental about what was being offered. She pulled up the decoded message again, studying it with fresh eyes. The invitation, the choice, the limitation on numbers. What if they had been interpreting it wrong? What if the limitation was not about capacity, but about something else entirely? "Stop," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the debate. "We need to reconsider our interpretation of the message." The room fell silent, all eyes turning to her. Elena pulled up the relevant sections of the transmission on the main display. "Look at this segment here. We translated it as a capacity limit, but what if that's not what it means? What if it's describing a threshold?" Sarah leaned forward, studying the patterns. "A threshold for what?" "For consciousness to sustain itself in the network," Elena replied, working through the idea as she spoke. "What if the 10,000 number isn't a limit on how many can join, but a minimum requirement for the transformation to work? What if they need at least that many to create a stable node in the network?" The implications rippled through the room. If Elena was right, then the choice was not about who got to join, but about whether enough people would choose to join voluntarily. "That changes everything," Foster said. "It means we're not selecting representatives. We're recruiting volunteers. But how do we ask for volunteers for something we barely understand ourselves?" Morrison asked. "How do we explain what this transformation means when we can't even fully decode the message?" "We tell the truth," Elena said. "We share everything we know and everything we don't know. We give people the information and let them decide for themselves whether to take this leap." Secretary General Santos nodded slowly. "It's the only ethical approach. But Elena, we have less than 20 hours. Can we reach enough people in that time? Can we explain something this complex to a global audience?" "We have to try," Elena replied. The announcement was made at hour 18. A simultaneous broadcast across every functional communication channel on Earth. Elena stood before the cameras, flanked by Secretary General Santos and representatives from the world's major nations, and tried to explain the unexplainable. "We are not alone in the universe," she began, her voice steady despite the trembling she felt inside. "What we observed on Kepler 442b was the beginning of a communication from an intelligence that exists beyond our current understanding. They have surrounded Earth with what we've been calling gravitational anomalies, but which we now understand to be nodes in a vast network of consciousness." She explained the invitation, the choice, the need for volunteers. She was honest about the uncertainties, about what they did and did not know. She showed the patterns, the decoded messages, the mathematical beauty of the communication. And she asked for people to make their own choice, to decide for themselves whether to leap into the unknown. "We need at least 10,000 volunteers," she said. "People willing to undergo a transformation that will fundamentally change what it means to be human. We can't promise what that transformation will entail. We can't guarantee safety or comfort or even recognizable existence. But we can offer you the chance to be part of something vast, to evolve beyond the limitations of individual consciousness and join with something greater." The response was overwhelming and immediate. Within hours, millions of people had registered their willingness to volunteer. Some were motivated by curiosity, others by faith, still others by desperation or hope, or the simple human desire to be part of something significant. Elena watched the numbers climb, watched as humanity proved once again its capacity for both courage and foolishness. She thought about volunteering herself, considered what it would mean to leave everything familiar behind and step into whatever waited beyond the threshold. But she knew her place was here, helping to manage this transition, providing what understanding she could for those who would take the leap. This was her role, her contribution to whatever humanity was becoming. At hour 12, the selection process began. Not random, not based on merit or privilege, but on a kind of resonance that the network itself seemed to determine. The 20 nodes around Earth began emitting focused beams of energy, touching individuals across the globe with a sensation that volunteers described as recognition, as being seen and known completely. Those who were touched felt the invitation not as words, but as a deep knowing, an understanding that reached beyond language into the core of consciousness itself. And one by one, they began to make their way toward the nodes, drawn by something that transcended mere physical proximity. Elena monitored the process from the Pentagon, watching as points of light appeared on global maps, marking the locations of chosen volunteers. They were diverse in every way that mattered, representing every continent, every culture, every walk of life. Scientists and artists, teachers and students, young and old, each one responding to the call in their own way. She saw Marcus among them, his name appearing on the list of those who had been touched by the network. He sent her a brief message before beginning his journey to the nearest node. "Thank you for everything, Elena. I hope we'll meet again, whatever form that meeting takes." Sarah too had been chosen, along with Dr. Foster and Dr. Tanaka and countless others she had worked with over the years. Elena felt the loss of them, the knowledge that these people she had collaborated with, argued with, learned from, would soon be transformed into something she could not follow. At hour 6, the first volunteers reached the nodes. Elena watched the satellite feed as they approached the points of light, their figures small against the vast energy emanating from each location. And then, in a moment of transformation that defied visual capture, they changed. Not disappeared, not destroyed, but altered in ways that existing cameras could not properly record. The volunteers became patterns of light and energy, their individual forms dissolving into the network, while somehow remaining distinct within the collective whole. Raymond called from Goddard, his voice thick with emotion. "Elena, I can feel them. The ones who have joined the network. They're still here, still present, but also somewhere else, simultaneously. It's like they exist in multiple states at once. How is that possible?" Elena asked, though she knew the question was meaningless. How was any of this possible? "I don't know. But Elena, they're trying to communicate. Not through words, or even through the mathematical patterns we've been decoding. They're reaching out directly to consciousness, to anyone willing to perceive them." Elena closed her eyes, opening herself to whatever might be there. And she felt it, a presence that was both familiar and alien, human and other. She recognized Marcus within it, and Sarah, and so many others. But they were no longer just themselves. They had become part of something vast and beautiful and terrifying. The countdown reached 0 at dawn, Eastern Standard Time. Elena stood on the roof of the Pentagon, watching as the first light of day illuminated the Washington skyline. Around the planet, 20 nodes pulsed with their final transformations, incorporating the last of the volunteers into the network. 14,000 people in total had been chosen and transformed. Not the minimum threshold, but more than enough to establish a stable human node within the vast collective consciousness. They existed now in a state that defied simple categorization, simultaneously human and other, individual and collective, physical and something beyond physical. The nodes themselves began to fade as the sun rose higher, their energy signatures diminishing as the transformation completed. Within an hour, they were gone, leaving no trace except for the changed people who had passed through them and the altered world they left behind. Elena returned to Goddard that afternoon, driving through a landscape that looked unchanged but felt fundamentally different. The electromagnetic interference had ceased, power had been restored, and life was returning to its familiar patterns. But nothing would ever truly be the same. Her office was empty, Marcus's desk cleared of personal items, Sarah's workspace neat and abandoned. Raymond was there, though, sitting in his chair and staring out the window at the Maryland autumn. He looked older than he had a week ago, worn down by events that no one should have had to navigate. "They're still out there," he said without turning around. "I can feel them at the edge of perception, like a presence just beyond the corner of your eye." Elena sat at her own desk, her leather-bound observation log open before her. She picked up her pen and began to write, documenting these final moments of the most significant event in human history. "Day 7 of contact," she wrote. "The transformation is complete. Humanity has been changed, not by conquest or destruction, but by choice. 14,000 of us have joined something greater, have evolved beyond the boundaries of individual consciousness. The rest of us remain, witnesses to a new chapter in human evolution. She paused, thinking about what to write next. How did you capture something like this in words? How did you preserve the experience for those who would come after, who would try to understand what had happened in these 7 extraordinary days? Her phone rang. It was Claire, calling from Seattle with wonder and relief in her voice. "Mom, are you okay? Is it over?" "I'm okay, sweetheart," Elena replied. "And yes, it's over. Or maybe it's just beginning. I'm not sure which yet." "I felt something this morning," Claire said. "Like a presence, warm and familiar. It felt like Dad, but also like more than Dad. Did you feel it too?" Elena closed her eyes, remembering the moment of connection she had experienced in the Pentagon. "Yes, I felt it. I think a lot of people did." "What does it mean, Mom? What happens now?" "I don't know," Elena admitted. "But we'll figure it out together. That's what we do. We observe, we learn, we adapt, and we keep moving forward." They talked for a while longer, Elena providing what comfort and reassurance she could. When she hung up, she found Raymond standing in her office doorway. "I'm retiring," he said simply. "Effective immediately. I'm too old for whatever comes next. This job, this field, it needs younger minds, people who can adapt to a universe that's proven to be far stranger than we imagined." "Raymond, no," Elena protested. "We need you. Your experience, your wisdom. You have those things yourself now," he replied gently. "You don't need me anymore, Elena. You haven't for a long time. This was your discovery, your moment. I was just here to bear witness." He walked to his office, and Elena heard him gathering his personal belongings. She wanted to stop him, to convince him to stay, but she understood. Some changes were too profound to integrate easily. Some people needed to step back and let others carry the work forward. That evening, Elena drove home to her empty house. She made dinner, ate alone at the kitchen table, and then sat in the living room with Thomas's photograph in her hands. The presence she had felt that morning returned, subtle but unmistakable. Not Thomas himself, but something that carried his essence, his warmth, his fundamental nature. "I miss you," she said to the photograph. "But I think maybe you're not as gone as I thought. Maybe none of us are ever truly gone." The presence seemed to pulse in response, a wordless communication that felt like comfort, like reassurance, like love. In the days that followed, the world began to adapt to its new reality. The transformed individuals, the ones who had joined the network, maintained a connection to Earth even as they existed in states that transcended planetary boundaries. They appeared in dreams, in moments of deep contemplation, in the spaces between thought and action. They were guides, teachers, bridges between humanity's past and its uncertain future. Elena returned to her work, but it was different now. The universe had revealed itself to be not just vast and strange, but alive with consciousness, with intelligence that operated on scales humanity was only beginning to comprehend. Every observation took on new significance, every piece of data potentially revealing another layer of cosmic awareness. She wrote extensively in her observation log, documenting not just the scientific aspects of what had occurred, but the human elements, the emotions and choices and transformations that had defined these extraordinary days. It would become, in time, one of the most important historical documents of the era, a first-hand account of humanity's first true contact with something beyond itself. Months passed, then years. The world changed in ways both obvious and subtle. Technology advanced as insights from the network filtered back through the transformed individuals. Art and philosophy flourished, inspired by perspectives that bridged human and other modes of existence. And gradually, humanity began to understand that the invitation had not been a one-time offer, but an ongoing opportunity, a door that remained open for those who chose to walk through it. Elena never volunteered for transformation herself. Her place, she came to understand, was as a witness, as someone who could stand at the boundary between old and new and help others navigate the crossing. She became a teacher, a mentor. sharing what she had learned and helping the next generation grapple with a universe that refused to be contained by simple categories. On an autumn morning, 5 years after the initial contact, Elena stood in her office at Goddard, now serving as director of the newly established Department of Post-Human Studies. The morning light filtered through the windows, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. She held her observation log, its pages now filled with years of notes and reflections, and turned to a fresh page. "Year 5 of the new era," she wrote. "We have learned to live with mystery, to accept that some questions have no final answers. The universe is stranger and more wonderful than we imagined, and humanity has proven itself capable of adapting to that strangeness with courage and grace. What comes next is unknown, but then it always was. The only difference now is that we know how much we don't know, and we've learned to find comfort in that uncertainty." She set down her pen and looked out at the Maryland landscape, at the changing leaves and the familiar rhythms of Earth's seasons. Somewhere out there, beyond the edge of perception, 14,000 humans existed in forms she could not quite imagine. And somewhere even further, across vast distances of space and time, a cosmic consciousness watched and waited. Patient in ways that transcended human understanding of patience, Elena smiled, thinking of Thomas, of Marcus and Sarah, of all those who had taken the leap into the unknown. They were gone but not lost, transformed but not destroyed. They were the future, whatever that future held. And she was here, grounded in the present, bearing witness to the extraordinary moment when humanity had looked into the vastness of space and found not emptiness, but recognition, not silence, but an invitation to join in a conversation that spanned the cosmos. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.